For centuries, the Jewish people were scattered across the globe, a nation without a land. They lived as minorities in Europe, the Middle East, and beyond, often facing persecution and intolerance. In their prayers and stories, they always remembered Zion, their ancient homeland. This was not just a historical memory, it was a living hope, a promise of return passed down through generations. By the late 1800s, this longing began to transform into a powerful political movement. The old world was changing, and with it the precarious position of Jews in many societies became ever more apparent. The idea of simply waiting for a divine miracle to restore them to their land began to seem insufficient in the face of modern dangers. This new energy was called Zionism. Its intellectual father was a Viennese journalist named Theodor Herzl. Witnessing the vicious anti-Semitism surrounding the Dreyfus affair in France, Herzl became convinced that assimilation into European societies was a failed experiment. He argued that the only true solution to the Jewish question was for the Jewish people to establish their own state. In 1897, he convened the First Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland, giving a formal structure and a clear voice to this ancient dream. He declared that in Basel he had founded the Jewish state, and that in 50 years everyone would see it. This was a bold, almost prophetic statement, but it lit a fire in the hearts of Jews worldwide. The call to return resonated deeply, especially in the pogrom-ridden lands of the Russian Empire. Here, life for Jews was marked by constant fear and violent oppression. The promise of a place where they could be masters of their own destiny, free from the whims of hostile rulers, was incredibly powerful. Zionism offered a practical path forward, a way to channel religious yearning into tangible action. It proposed building a modern, secular nation on an ancient foundation, where Jewish culture, language, and identity could flourish without apology. It was a vision of self-determination, a radical idea for a people so long defined by their relationship to others. So, the journey began not with ships, but with an idea. It was a revolution in thought before it was a movement of people. The idea was that Jews were not just a religious community, but a nation deserving of a sovereign home in their ancestral land, the land of Israel, then a part of the Ottoman Empire. This notion combined the deep spiritual connection to the land with the modern political language of nationalism. It created a powerful momentum that would soon see small groups of idealistic pioneers pack their bags and set out for a land they had only read about in holy books, ready to turn a dream into soil, water, and stone. The first waves of modern Jewish immigration to Palestine, known as Alayas, began in the 1880s. These early pioneers were mostly from Eastern Europe, fleeing persecution and fired by Zionist ideals. They arrived in a land that was largely barren and neglected, a far cry from the biblical land of milk and honey they had imagined. The Ottoman authorities were often unwelcoming, and the landscape itself presented enormous challenges. The newcomers knew little of the local climate or farming techniques. They purchased tracts of land, often from absentee landlords, that were swampy and malaria-ridden or arid and rocky. Their task was immense: to build a new society from the ground up. These early settlers established some of the first modern Jewish agricultural communities, known as moshavot. They drained swamps in the Jezreel Valley and planted eucalyptus trees to help dry the land. They cultivated citrus groves along the coastal plain, which would become a symbol of the new Jewish enterprise. A key development was the creation of the kibbutz, a collective community where property was shared and life was organized around socialist principles. These communities were laboratories for a new kind of Jewish life, one based on manual labor, self-sufficiency, and a deep connection to the soil. The revival of Hebrew as a modern spoken language, led by Eliezer ben Yehuda, was another monumental effort, turning an ancient tongue into the daily language of the streets and fields. However, their path was filled with hardship. The pioneers faced disease, hunger, and extreme poverty. Malaria and other illnesses were rampant in the undrained lands. The agricultural work was backbreaking, and many early efforts failed due to inexperience and the harsh conditions. There was also growing friction with the local Arab population. While some interactions were peaceful, competition over scarce resources like land and water created tension. The Arab inhabitants, who had lived on the land for generations, began to see the influx of Jewish immigrants as a threat to their own way of life and future aspirations, planting the seeds of a long and complex conflict. Despite these obstacles, the Zionist project slowly took root. Organizations like the Jewish National Fund were established to purchase and develop land for Jewish settlement, creating a more systematic approach to building the national home. With each new wave of immigration, new towns and villages appeared. Tel Aviv was founded in 1909 on sand dunes north of the ancient port of Jaffa, growing into the first modern all-Jewish city. These early decades were a testament to the settlers' resilience and unwavering commitment. They were driven by the conviction that they were not merely colonists, but a people returning home, reclaiming their history and building their future. The rise of Nazism in Germany in the 1930s cast a terrifying shadow over European Jewry. As persecution intensified, the urgency to find a safe haven grew desperate. Many Jews tried to flee to Palestine, but the British, who had been granted a mandate over the territory after World War I, imposed strict immigration quotas in response to Arab unrest. This policy trapped hundreds of thousands of Jews in Europe, sealing their fate. The Holocaust, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime, was the horrific culmination of centuries of anti-Semitism. For the survivors, the idea of returning to a Europe soaked in the blood of their families was unthinkable. The need for a sovereign Jewish state was no longer a political theory, it had become an existential necessity. After the war, the world was confronted with the staggering scale of the Holocaust and the plight of the displaced Jewish survivors languishing in camps across Europe. The international community could no longer ignore the Jewish people's claim for a home. Illicit ships like the famous Exodus 1947 tried to run the British naval blockade, carrying desperate survivors to the shores of Palestine. These dramatic events captured global attention and increased pressure on Britain to find a solution. The Zionist leadership argued forcefully that only an independent state could guarantee the safety and dignity of the Jewish people and prevent another such catastrophe from ever happening again. Unable to resolve the escalating conflict between Jews and Arabs, Britain turned the problem over to the newly formed United Nations. In November 1947, the UN General Assembly voted on Resolution 181, which called for the partition of Palestine into separate Arab and Jewish states, with Jerusalem to be under international administration. The Jewish leadership accepted the plan, seeing it as a historic opportunity to achieve sovereignty, even on a small portion of the land. The Arab states and the Palestinian Arab leadership vehemently rejected it, promising to prevent its implementation by force. The vote immediately triggered a civil war between the Jewish and Arab communities in Palestine. On May 14, 1948, the day the British mandate expired, David Ben-Gurion, the head of the Jewish Agency, stood before a crowd in the Tel Aviv Museum and declared the establishment of the State of Israel. His voice, broadcast by radio, announced the fulfillment of the 2,000-year-old dream. The State of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles, he proclaimed. The new state was born into war. The very next day, armies from the neighboring Arab states of Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq invaded, determined to destroy the fledgling nation at its birth. Israel's war of independence had begun. Israel survived its war of independence, but the victory came at a great cost and set the stage for decades of conflict. The ensuing years were defined by a series of wars, including the 1956 Suez Crisis, the 1967 Six-Day War, and the 1973 Yom Kippur War. These conflicts profoundly shaped the nation's borders, its military doctrine, and its psyche. The Six-Day War in particular was a turning point, resulting in Israel gaining control of the West Bank, Gaza Strip, Golan Heights, and the Sinai Peninsula, as well as reuniting the city of Jerusalem. While seen by Israelis as a miraculous defensive victory, it also placed millions of Palestinians under Israeli rule, creating a complex and enduring occupation. Despite the constant state of conflict, Israel focused on one of its core missions, the ingathering of the exiles. In the years immediately following independence, the country's population doubled, as it absorbed Holocaust survivors from Europe and entire Jewish communities from Arab and Muslim countries. Jews from Yemen, Iraq, Morocco and elsewhere, facing persecution in their home countries, were airlifted to Israel in massive operations like Operation Magic Carpet and Operation Ezra and Nehemiah. Later waves of immigration brought Jews from Ethiopia who had preserved their traditions in isolation for centuries, and over 1 million from the former Soviet Union following its collapse. This massive influx of people from diverse backgrounds created a vibrant but also challenging cultural mosaic. The path toward peace has been as difficult as the experience of war. A major breakthrough came in 1979 with the Camp David Accords, where Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin and Egyptian President Anwar Sadat signed a historic peace treaty, the first between Israel and an Arab nation. This was followed in the 1990s by the Oslo Accords with the Palestine Liberation Organization, which created a framework for Palestinian self-government, and a peace treaty with Jordan in 1994. However, the core conflict with the Palestinians remains unresolved, marked by cycles of violence and failed negotiations, remaining the most significant challenge to Israel's future security and identity. Today, Israel is a dynamic and complex society. It is a world leader in technology and innovation, a bustling democracy with a free press and a robust civil society. Its cities are a blend of ancient and modern, where religious and secular Jews live side by side, often in creative tension. The nation continues to be a destination for Jews from all over the world, each bringing their own culture, language and traditions to the evolving story of the Jewish state. Life in modern Israel is a constant negotiation between the burdens of history, the pressures of the present, and the enduring dream of a secure and peaceful future in the ancient homeland.